When the CEO's mute daughter met a boy using sign language, you won't believe what happened. In the heart of the bustling city, whispers swirled like a dangerous storm around one particular girl, the CEO's daughter, known for her silence. A hush fell over conversations whenever she entered a room, her silence somehow louder than the bustling chatter around her. She moved like a shadow, gliding through the crowds, eyes downcast, her hands restless, always darting to communicate yet never able to utter a word. It was a mystery, her silence. What did it mean? What secrets lay buried behind those expressive eyes? But one fateful day, everything changed when she crossed paths with a boy who spoke the language of her soul, sign language. As the elevator doors opened to the lavish penthouse party of her father, the air crackled with excitement. Glittering lights danced in her peripheral vision, making the room shimmer as if encased in diamonds. Despite the luxury, she felt like an outsider, trapped in a world of noise from which she couldn't escape. And then, amid the clinking glasses and laughter, she saw him. He stood there, casually leaning against the wall, fingers flying through the air, weaving vibrant stories with his hands. His smile was easy, bright enough to cut through the party's chaos. When their eyes met, it was as if a thunderbolt connected them. Sparks flew, and the impossible became possible, but then, the energy shifted. A silence overwhelmed the laughter. The boy faltered, a flicker of confusion passing over his face. The hair on the back of her neck stood up. Something was wrong. Was it her imagination, or did she feel the weight of 100 staring eyes, all judging, all wondering? The buzz that had filled the room vanished, leaving an unsettling stillness. A feeling of dread settled in her stomach, tightening like a vice. What could disrupt such a perfect moment? Hey, before we continue with this amazing story, I need to give you an important heads up. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube unsubscribed them without warning. Take a quick second to check the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I'd hate for you to miss any of the exclusive content coming soon. And while you're there, smash that like button, it really helps me out with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who's part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's connect. The boy's expression darkened, his hands slowed, as if he sensed the shift in the atmosphere. She reached out, eager to communicate, to bridge the silence that had grown between them. Before she could sign anything, a sudden crash echoed through the room, loud and jarring, pulling everyone's attention. A glass shattered on the floor, liquid pooling like a dark omen. Gasps erupted, eyes darting. And in that moment, he turned away, body tense, as if he was about to bolt. The fear in her chest swelled. What had scared him? Was it the party? Was it her? As the crowd erupted into a frenzy, every heartbeat echoed her desperation. She had to know what was wrong. But before she could chase after him, the murmurs of the party shifted again, revealing something deeper, a secret woven into her father's prestigious company that might change everything. What was it? And how was it connected to the boy who suddenly seemed to know her more than anyone else ever had? The questions hung heavy in the air, suspended like the delicate glass that lay shattered on the floor. Her instincts kicked in. She couldn't let him slip away. As he turned to leave, she took a step forward, her heart racing like a wild drum. The crowd, a sea of murmurs and frantic movement, felt like a barrier she had to push through. The laughter had turned into a cacophony of confused chatter. She caught snippets of conversations, words like scandal and insider information swirled around, igniting a fire of anxiety deep within her. Every glance of the party guests felt like a sharp jab, their eyes filled with judgment or pity. For the first time, her silence felt like a prison. Why couldn't she call out to him? Why couldn't she run to him and demand an explanation for the fear etched on his face? Before she could process what she was doing, she shot through the crowd. Her palms were clammy, her pulse thundering in her ears. But just as she reached the exit, the boy was gone. Panic gripped her. The sudden quiet left in his wake felt like an echo, a haunting reminder that all was not right. Straining to see through the throng, she noticed a door slightly ajar at the end of the hallway. Could he have gone there? With promise and dread intertwining in her gut, she pushed through the door. It led to a narrow staircase spiraling down into the darkness below. The heavy air was thick with tension, she could feel it prickling against her skin. She took a deep breath and began her descent, each step echoing a haunting question: where was he, and why did it feel like everything was unraveling? The stairs opened up to a dimly lit basement, filled with the unmistakable scent of damp concrete and something more disturbing: fear. Her instincts screamed for her to turn back, yet she pushed forward, her shoes tapping softly against the ground. A muffled sound reached her ears: someone was crying. "Is anyone there?" she called, her voice barely a whisper as she strained to hear the source of the anguish. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was him. Relief washed over her, but it quickly evaporated when she saw the tears streaming down his cheeks. The boy's hands covered his face, trembling with undeniable anguish. Before she could reach him, he whipped around, his eyes wide with panic. "You shouldn't be here. It's not safe." His voice was frantic, each word trembling like the leaves of a tree in a storm. She felt a surge of confusion and concern. Why did he look so alarmed? "Please, just tell me what's wrong." She signed desperately, words flowing from her fingertips in a flurry. He shook his head, a defeated gesture that tore through her. "You don't understand. This isn't just about us. They're watching." Her heart plummeted. Who was watching? And just as that thought settled in her mind, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hall. She froze. Her heart raced again, fear swallowing her whole. "Quick! We need to hide." He grabbed her wrist, tugging her behind a stack of old crates just as the basement door swung open. Shadows danced on the wall as two figures stepped inside, their hushed voices mingling with the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "What are they planning?" one of them hissed. The bored one let it go easily. Her breath hitched in her throat, and as her eyes met the boys', they both realized that they had stumbled upon something far more sinister than they could have ever imagined. What were they planning? Who were these people? Time felt like it stood still. Panic coursed through her, but so did an unexpected sense of determination. She needed to know. As the figures continued their hushed conversation, the boy squeezed her hand. The reality of their situation began to dawn on her like a harsh light. There was no turning back now. What secrets lay hidden in the darkness ahead, waiting to unveil themselves? And how far would they go to uncover the truth? She held her breath as the shadows loomed over them, the air thickening with an overwhelming sense of danger. She could barely make out the figures that stood just a few feet away, their faces shrouded in dim light. The first one spoke again, voice low but laced with intensity. "We need to act fast. The shareholders are losing faith. If we don't deal with this soon, everything could fall apart." Then we cut her off. "No more access to the accounts," the second figure replied curtly. "She'll just keep digging, asking questions and getting too close to the truth. We can't let that happen." Her heart plummeted, their words were a knife through the silence, chilling her to the bone. Who were they talking about? With a quick, panicked glance at the boy, whose face mirrored her own fear, she felt her heartbeat quicken. "Cut her off." She mouthed silently to him, her mind racing. Who are they talking about? But the boy shook his head, his eyes wide with fear. "We need to stay quiet," he whispered, urgency cracking his voice. As the figures continued their conversation, she strained to listen, feeling her cheeks flush with anxiety. Each word they uttered felt like a thread unraveling a tapestry of secrets woven tightly around her life. "They have to think she is harmless. That's how we can get away with this," the first figure insisted, a tone of contempt creeping into his voice. "Harmless?" The second figure scoffed. "With her digging, it won't be long until someone notices. And the reports, they're already suspicious. We can't keep the lid on forever." A chill of betrayal washed over her. Suspicions? reports. Her instincts had screamed at her that something wasn't right, and now she was caught in the eye of a brewing storm. Every piece of her wanted to lash out, to confront them, but she knew better. Their words were too dangerous to ignore. Suddenly, footsteps echoed outside the basement door, heavy and deliberate. The figures froze, exchanging worried glances, their earlier confidence waning. The boy tugged her closer, hiding them deeper behind the stack of crates. She could barely breathe. "Check it out," one of the men urged, gesturing sharply towards the door. The second figure nodded, stealthy and composed, moving toward the beam of light spilling from the door's crack. In that agonizing moment, adrenaline surged through her veins. They might discover them. She might lose her only chance to get answers about the world twisting around her and the boy beside her. What truth was entangled in their words? What were they hiding? "Stay close," the boy whispered, clutching her hand tighter. She could feel the tension radiating off him, their lives suddenly intertwined in this fragile moment of danger. The door creaked open, revealing a warped doorway that seemed to hold 1,000 unknown threats. Shadows shifted outside the figures from the party, she noted, their silhouettes strangely casual yet menacing. The voices grew louder, creating a chaotic mix of unease and urgency. "I heard she's been asking too many questions. If we don't deal with it soon, we're all in trouble. It's not just her asking questions, it's what she might find." The weight of their words sank deeper, making her feel impossibly small. As she met the boy's eyes again, she felt the tremor of resolve. They had to find a way out of this and figure out who she was before it spiraled any further. "Listen, we can't stay here. We have to move." She was signing urgently, determination igniting in her chest, but as they started to shift into a crouch, a loud crash rang out, a threat crescendoed with chaos, and her stomach dropped. "Get out of the way. They can't be here." One of the figures shouted, panic flashing across his face. The sound of rushing footsteps thundered behind the door. Were they going to get caught? With her heart pounding against her ribcage, she was convinced they had only seconds left. What would she discover if they made it out of this basement alive? Would the truth be liberating or devastating? And as another figure burst through the door, intensity gripping her chest. Like a vice, she knew the real challenges were just beginning. What waited on the other side was shrouded in uncertainty. Would she find safety or more secrets? Would they be ready for whatever came next? The door swung open with a force that felt like a punch to the gut. The dim light from the hallway spilled into the basement, illuminating the fear carved into their faces. Instinct took over, she and the boy ducked behind the crates, hearts racing like wild horses. "Where is she?" The voice belonged to a newcomer, the tone harsh and demanding, echoing against the concrete walls. The first figure had stepped back, his confident facade cracking like glass under strain. "She can't stay hidden for long," he murmured, casting nervous glances around the room. "We lost track of her. Do you think she heard us?" The second figure's voice dripped with dread. There was desperation mingling with the threat of violence, a concoction that made the air thick and suffocating. The boy's fingers tightened around her hand. She could see the muscles in his jaw working, his eyes wide and fearful. He was fully aware of the stakes, just as she was. They needed a plan, and fast. If she did, we have to anticipate what she might do next. She becomes a liability the moment she knows, the newcomer snapped, stepping further into the basement. The shadows shifted more violently, and in that moment, they appeared more monstrous than ever. "Deal with her now," the first figure urged, and her stomach twisted. The threat in those words hung heavy, an unyielding weight. "Wait, what are you talking about?" The boy's voice changed, quivering with horror. He began to push her further behind the crates, instinctively shielding her. The footsteps of the newcomer echoed closer, his shadow swallowing the space where they huddled. She held her breath, feeling the metallic taste of fear in her mouth. This was no longer about just eavesdropping, it was survival now. Think. If she gets into those accounts, she'll expose everything. The money, the fraud, the control, the second figure said, voice dropping to a whisper that sent chills down her spine. She has to disappear for this to work. Her heart thundered in response. They were discussing her life and the secrets wrapped around it. Her confusion twisted into clarity, she had to find a way to escape. But how? Suddenly, the boy tapped her hand just as a thought darted through her mind. She turned her head slightly, catching his eye. He was signaling. Distraction, he mouthed, eyes locked on the staircase above them. It took only a second for her to understand what he meant. If they created a diversion, it might give them just enough time to slip away unnoticed. They needed to act. She nodded, adrenaline surging anew as she prepared for what they might do next. The boy shifted, balancing on his knees, and began to tap rhythmically against the crate. Quiet at first, then growing louder. It was a sound that could mimic something unexpected, a noise from the outside. The figures froze, their heads snapping toward the source, their expressions hardening into confusion. What the hell is that? The newcomer demanded, eyes scanning the room wildly. Go check it out. The first figure barked, nervous now, the facade of control slipping. As two of them moved towards the noise, she and the boy seized the moment. Heart pounding in her ears, she pushed herself up and bolted towards the opposite wall, the whispers of danger chasing them. But as they crept closer to the door, she felt the thrill of hope lick at the edges of her fear. They might actually escape. Suddenly, a shout echoed through the basement, slicing that hope in half. Get back here. They turned, eyes wide. The remaining figure had spotted them, rage boiling in his gaze. Stop! He yelled. It was the command of someone who thought they held the power. They dashed toward the door, knowing every second counted. The shadows closed in fast behind them. What awaited them outside? Would they find freedom, or had they just jumped from one trap into another? As they burst through the door, the world opened up before them, bright and harsh, every sound amplified, and she realized that doing this was just the beginning. Would they survive whatever waited in the chaos above? The air outside was a stark contrast to the suffocating darkness of the basement. She squinted against the blinding sunlight, taking in the harsh reality of their world. The chaos above them was palpable, the shrieks of sirens and distant shouts merging into a cacophony that felt like a storm brewing just beyond the walls of their former prison. Where do we go? The boy hissed, glancing nervously over his shoulder. Fear painted his face, and she could see his mind racing with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. Just run. She gasped, adrenaline pushing her forward. They darted across the overgrown yard, her heart thrumming wildly in her chest. Every instinct screamed at her to keep moving, to find safety, any safety far from those men, but even as they ran, a fear gnawed at her thoughts. What if they caught them? What would happen then? They reached a patch of trees on the edge of the yard, thick foliage providing temporary cover. She pressed herself against the bark of a massive oak, panting and straining to listen for any sign of pursuit. The boy leaned against the trunk beside her, eyes wide as he tried to catch his breath. Did they follow us? He whispered, trembling. She could hear the rush of her own blood in her ears, the thudding of her heart drowning out everything else. I don't know, she admitted, her voice a raw whisper. They crouched low, melding into the shadows, moments stretched like eternity, every rustle of the leaves making them flinch. The weight of their flight began to settle on her shoulders, and doubt crept in. Would they be safe? Would anyone help them? Finally, they dared to peek out from behind the tree. The yard was quiet now, eerily still. Maybe we should just go. He urged, his eyes darting to the break in the tree line that led away from the chaos. No, she shook her head fiercely, unwilling to move from what felt like a safe haven. Not yet. We need to be sure. But the longer they stayed hidden, the more the original fear morphed into something darker, paranoia. What if they were out there, waiting, watching? Just then, a low growl shattered the stillness. She turned, eyes wide, as a large dog emerged from the far side of the yard. It stood, stiff and tense, its teeth bared and eyes locked onto them. "Oh no," the boy whimpered, taking a step back. They were trapped, the yard was a cage, and the beast was the lock. "Stay still," she whispered, her mind racing. "If we move, it'll think we're a threat." The dog barked, a fierce, warning sound that sent a bolt of ice through her veins. The boy's breath quickened, matching the rhythm of his escalating panic. Just as she thought they might be cornered, a commotion erupted. From the direction of the house, shouts and blaring sirens grew louder. Figures were moving, drawing closer. But they weren't the men from the basement, these were uniformed officers, rushing forward with urgency. "Hey! You two!" An officer shouted, breaking through the tension like glass shattering. "We're here to help." But just as she turned to run towards the sound of safety, the dog lunged forward, instincts kicking in, and all hell broke loose. Adrenaline surged as the boy grabbed her hand, pulling her back just as the dog leapt. Everything felt slow in that moment. She could almost see the panic painted on the boy's face as they stumbled, a desperate dance between freedom and danger. "What do we do?" he screamed, eyes wide with fear. The shadows of the past still loomed over them. The sirens filled her ears, drowning out her thoughts. Choices whirled in her head, and the world fractured around her as she realized, their escape was just the beginning, and no matter how fast they ran, danger was never far behind. Which path would they take next? The one leading to freedom or deeper into the storm? The dog lunged, teeth bared and muscles taut. She felt a surge of raw terror rush through her, flooding her veins. "Run!" she shouted, pulling the boy with her as they darted left, veering deeper into the trees. The staccato of the dog's paws pounded behind them, spurring them onward. Heart racing, she slipped between branches, desperation fueling her escape. As branches scraped against her skin and the world around them blurred in a chaotic rush, she risked a glance back. The dog was close, too close. Its growl echoed like a thunderclap, closing in on them. Adrenaline surged even higher. "Keep moving," she urged, not daring to look back again. Each step felt heavy, her feet barely keeping pace with the pounding rhythm of her heart. They broke into a clearing, sunlight pouring down onto the grass, a brief solace amid the chaos. She dashed toward the thick hedge on the far side, stepping up their pace. "We need to hide." But before they could reach it, the dog burst through the trees, jaws snapping just inches away from her leg. She let out a cry, yanking the boy to the side as they stumbled. Adrenaline coursed through her, every instinct screamed to survive. The boy's small hand was trembling in hers, but he didn't let go. "What do we do?" he whimpered, panic surging in his voice. The clearing felt exposed, a stage set for their demise. Glancing around, she spotted an old wooden shed a few yards away, its door hanging crookedly on rusted hinges. "Over there!" she shouted, pointing. "We can hide inside." Without waiting for him to reply, she sprinted toward it, the urgency pounding at her like a drum in her chest. They reached the door, and with a desperate shove, she burst inside, dragging the boy after her. The smell of damp wood and decay overwhelmed her senses, but they had no time. She shoved the door shut just as she heard the dog's frantic nails scratching at the ground outside. Inside, the darkness held its breath. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light creeping through the cracks, and she could barely make out the outlines of old tools and boxes piled high. As their breath steadied, they huddled behind a stack of crates. The boy's eyes were wide, glistening with fear. "What if it finds us?" he whispered. "It won't," she breathed, forcing confidence into her voice. "It's just a dog." But even as she spoke, doubt gnawed at her stomach. What if they were followed? What if those men had sent the dog after them as a tracker? The weight of uncertainty pressed down heavy, suffocating in the dim space. Outside, the dog barked furiously, pacing back and forth, while sporadic shouts echoed in the distance. The officers were still nearby, but how close were they? Even with help on the way, Could they close in on the danger before it reached them? Her heart pounded in her chest as she stole a glance through a crack in the shed door. The yard was a flurry of blue uniforms, and in the murmur of voices, she caught a word that sent chills down her spine: hostage. Confusion, fear, and dread mixed in her gut, twisting like a knife. Hostage? They weren't just running from some random threat. A scream erupted in the distance, followed by a deafening silence. The dog quieted, and dread unfurled in her chest like a dark flower blooming. "What is happening?" the boy asked, his voice trembling. She bit her lip, her mind racing. They couldn't stay here. They had to find a way out before it was too late. But as they grasped at the fragile thread of escape, a loud crash shattered the stillness. The door to the shed flew open with a violent clatter. What stood on the threshold sent a jolt of fear straight to her heart. There was no time to think, no time to hesitate. As the shadows loomed over them, she knew, they had stepped into something far worse than they could imagine. Would they be able to break free, or had their escape just begun, a nightmare they couldn't wake from? The silhouette in the doorway loomed like a storm cloud, dark and heavy with malice. She barely registered the face, fierce and lined, with eyes that seemed to pierce right through her. It was a man, and he wasn't alone. Two more figures materialized behind him, broad-shouldered shadows ready to close in. "No!" she gasped, instinctively pushing the boy farther back into the dim shadows of the shed. Every heartbeat echoed in her ears, drowning out any rational thought. "Where are you hiding?" the man growled. His voice was low and gravelly, a predator stalking its prey. The boy's grip tightened around her hand, his breath hitching in his throat. She shot him a glance, a silent plea not to make a sound, but the chaos outside barks, shouts pulsed in her mind like a drum. She watched as the men exchanged glances and stepped further into the shed, their heavy boots crunching on debris. Panic clawed at her lungs as they rummaged through toolboxes and crates with a casual disregard. "They've gotta be around here somewhere," one of them muttered, tossing aside a rusty wrench. "Yeah, and if we don't find them soon." The man in charge hesitated, a flicker of something unsettling crossing his face. "Boss won't be happy." She held her breath, feeling the weight of despair pressing down. Her mind raced. Who was this boss? Why were they here? Fear twisted and turned inside her. There had to be a way out, but the shed felt like a coffin now, closing tighter with every passing second. Suddenly, the man nearest the door spotted something glinting beneath the edge of a crate. He squatted low, his eyes narrowing. "What is this?" "Just junk," the other man replied dismissively. But she couldn't wait for them to decide. While the men argued over their next step, she caught sight of a thin window tucked away in the far corner, partially obscured by cobwebs. It seemed like an impossible escape route, but if they were going to live, she had to try. "Hold tight," she whispered to the boy, her heart racing. She crept backwards on silent feet, inching toward the escape route. "Look!" The first man stood up suddenly, his voice sharp as glass. "It's them. Get them." Panic surged through her like a wildfire. The boy's eyes widened in terror as she turned sharply, ready to flee. "Run!" she shouted, urgency crashing over her like waves. They dashed through the narrow space between the crates. She felt the rush of air at her back, the raised voices behind her, fury boiling over. One man lunged, his fingers grazing her shirt. She twisted at the last moment, desperation fueling her flight. "Go! Go!" she screamed, and they bolted toward the window. She reached it first, throwing herself against the frame, pushing the wooden slats as hard as she could while the boys' frantic breaths mingled with the chaos behind them. "Help me!" she hissed, arms outstretched at the window as the boy scrambled forward, fear igniting each of his movements. Then came the crash of a foot against wood. The men were on them. The air turned thick with a sense of impending doom. "Quick!" She barely had time to assess if they would fit through when a hand landed on her shoulder, gripping hard. The world exploded into chaos, screams and barking echoing like a dreadful symphony around them. She felt the boy slip away from her grasp, but not before she shouted, "Trust me." With a final surge of determination, she hurled her body through the window, scraping skin against rough wood and glass. What awaited her on the other side? Had they escaped the clutches of fear only to find danger anew? The ground met her with a thud, and she gasped, looking around desperately for the boy. The men's frantic silhouettes loomed behind the shed, shadows stretching long against the setting sun, but where was he? The sound of a barking dog surged louder, a desperate yelp in the distance. Time didn't wait for them, it was slipping through their fingers. "Don't leave me!" she shouted into the fading light. But would the shadows answer, or would darkness claim them both? Her heart raced faster than her thoughts as she landed on the dry grass outside the shed. Dust clouded her vision, but she pushed past it, straining to hear any sign of the boy. His face, filled with fear and confusion, haunted her mind as she turned in circles, searching for him. "Where are you?" she whispered, panic clawing at her throat. The barking dog was closer now, each bark echoing through the air like a countdown to disaster. Shadows seemed to stretch and flicker around her, merging with the encroaching twilight, casting eerie shapes against the ground. Just behind her, the shed's door slammed open, sending a jolt of fear through her. She had only seconds to make a decision: stay hidden and hope he finds her, or search for him in the unfolding chaos. "Stay low," she instructed herself, crouching near a fallen tree. The bark felt rough against her palm, grounding her as she steadied her breaths, listening intently. The voices were rising. The men were angry now, issuing commands. "Split up. Find them." The urgency in their tone sent chills up her spine. If they split up, the boy could be in far greater danger. She willed her legs to move, stepping cautiously toward the sound of the barking. She swallowed hard, heart pounding in her ears. The grass whispered under her feet, and the scent of damp earth filled her nostrils. Come on," she murmured, focusing on the darkness from which the sounds throbbed. Then she saw a flash of movement ahead. A small figure, hidden in the brush. Relief flooded over her as she recognized the boy, crouched and trembling. But there was no time for celebration, every second counted, and the threat loomed close. "Here," she whispered urgently, beckoning him. He turned, his eyes wide with fear and pleading. He glanced back toward the shed, and she felt her heart twist. "Please. We need to go," she urged, pushing aside her own fears. He hesitated, fear palpable in the way his hands shook at his sides. Then, without a word, he nodded and darted towards her. They merged into the shadows, moving as one. The barking grew frantic, ominous. They had to hurry. "Can you hear the dog?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "Yeah, but we can't let it see us," she replied, her eyes scanning the darkening area, searching for a place to hide. They needed shelter, something sturdy to shield them. "Over there." He pointed toward a cluster of bushes near the edge of the wooded area. "We can," but the echo of footsteps behind them shattered their plan. Low, angry voices carried through the still air. "They can't have gotten far. Keep looking." Fear washed over her again. She grasped his hand firmly. "This way." They sprinted toward the bushes, slipping into the undergrowth just as a beam of light flashed across the area, illuminating the ground around them. Breathless, they crouched down low, peering through leaves that felt like a protective barrier. "Do you think they saw us?" the boy whispered, his voice trembling. "I don't know. But we can't stay here." Her mind raced with possibilities. How to escape these men? What if they couldn't? The boy suddenly squeezed her hand, his wide gaze focused behind them. She followed his gaze, and her breath caught. 3 dark silhouettes moved too close, their flashlights cutting through the bushes. The men's gruff voices grew louder. "They've gotta be here somewhere. Move." Desperation clawed at her desperation again, but the boy leaned close and spoke in a hushed tone. What if we take a chance? What do you mean? She asked, confusion mingling with fear. Trust me, he murmured, and with that, he released her hand. Before she could react, he darted from the bushes, making a break toward the tree line. Wait! She cried, but he was moving fast, faster than she anticipated. In that split second, she had to choose, follow him, or stay and risk the men discovering their hiding place. Please, she whispered, unsure of what she would find on the other side if she gave chase. Could she follow him into the unknown? Or stay and fight, even if the storm was closing in around them? The tension hung heavily in the air as she weighed her options. What would unfold in the darkness ahead? Would trust guide her, or would it lead to an unwelcome end? She hesitated for just a heartbeat, but it felt like a lifetime. The boy was already rushing into the thickening shadows, and every instinct screamed for her to follow. She couldn't leave him. Drawing in a deep breath, she pushed through the branches and sprinted after him. Wait! I'm right behind you. She called out, though her voice felt small against the cacophony of chaos. The barking dog-esque growl reverberated, desperate and close, making her stomach twist. They crashed through the underbrush, branches scratching at her arms and legs, the wild whispers of the night echoing their movements. The air was heavy, and her lungs burned as she weaved between trees, trying to keep sight of the boy's small silhouette up ahead, but just as she started to close the distance, she heard the heavy crunch of boots on dried leaves, the low, menacing laughter of one of the men following them. Her heart dipped. They were closing in, drawing a net around them. There! One called out, shattering the dark with his voice. I see something. No. Not that way. She thought, panic rising like bile in her throat. She pushed herself harder, determined to stay close to the boy. He suddenly slowed, darting behind a massive oak tree, and she followed his lead. They ducked behind the colossal trunk, the rough bark scraping against her back. She gripped the boy's arm, trying to steady them both. They're too close, she whispered, voice hoarse and trembling. I know a way, he said, not looking at her, his brow furrowed in concentration. Are you sure? We can't keep running aimlessly. She felt a surge of doubt as fear clawed at her insides. Trust me. He insisted, his intensity sending shivers down her spine. He pointed into the darkness. We can climb the rocks. They won't see us if we're up high. Rocks? She echoed, trying to picture it through the thick cover of night. Time was slipping away, and the men were getting closer. If you think it'll work now. He urged, pulling her by the hand again. They crouched carefully out from behind the tree, eyes scanning the darkness, hearts racing like a frantic drum. The boy led her toward a jagged outcrop that jutted from the hillside, glimmering faintly against the moonlight. As they scrambled up the rough surface, rocks crumbled beneath their feet, threatening to tumble down into the abyss below. She glanced back, adrenaline pushing her upwards. The men were almost on them, frantic voices mingling with the growing chaos behind. Where do they go? One shouted, frustrated. Even from their hideout, they could hear the danger creeping closer. She barely registered how tight the boy's grip had become, the tension threading through their joints as they finally reached a small ledge tucked behind the rocks. Stay still, he whispered sharply, pointing below. The men's flashlights tore through the shadows, probing every corner. She closed her eyes, praying they wouldn't be found as the beams danced perilously close. What if they find us? Her voice cracked in fear. They won't, not if we're quiet, he reassured, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt. In that moment, every sound, the rustling leaves overhead, the barks of the dog, the men bickering felt magnified, wrapping around her like an icy shroud. She held her breath as the flashlights flickered, moving away from their hiding spot. But then, she noticed something else. A nearby bush was moving. No, someone was there. Someone they hadn't seen yet. What is that? She whispered, heart slamming against her ribs as dread blanketed her. The boy's eyes widened. I don't know. Suddenly, a voice spoke out, low and soft, but echoing with authority. You'll want to come out of there. It's not safe. Her breath caught in her throat. Who was that? And were they friend or foe? As tension gripped her chest, the shadows shifted once more. They had a decision to make. Would they trust another voice calling from the safety of darkness? Or cling to the unknown dangers below? The night held its breath, leaving only uncertainty and questions lingering in the air. What would they choose? The moment stretched taut, the weight of choice binding them like a noose. She clung tightly to the boy's hand, his anxious gaze darting between the voice in the shadows and the looming threat that prowled below. What should we do? He whispered, his breath barely breaking the silence. Just wait a second, she replied, her mind racing. Father's men, the revelations about her family, the urgent shadows of danger threatening their lives, everything collided in a heady spiral of fear. But trust was a risk they had to weigh carefully. The unknown voice seemed distant and assured, but what if it was another trap? Come on now, we're not here to hurt you, the voice coaxed again, this time softer, more inviting. You have to get away from them. We can help. She glanced at the boy, his expression reflecting her inner turmoil. Were they ready to reach for the lifeline or wait in the dark? The boy tightened his grip, a gesture of solidarity that sparked courage in her chest. Let us go, she said suddenly, the decision settling like a stone. Together, they inched toward the edge of their rocky perch, seeking the source of the mysterious voice. They caught sight of a figure emerging from behind the bushes, a woman, fierce yet calming, with weathered hands ready to guide them. Her heart raced as the woman took steps forward. You need to come back down. There's no time. Trust me, the woman urged, her tone steady, eyes filled with an understanding that calmed the storm of fear swirling within her. The boy hesitated, uncertainty rippling through him. We're in danger, the woman continued, urgency cracking through her calm facade. I've worked with your father. We know their plans, but you're in the crossfire. We're your only way out. What is your name? She blurted, needing to tether herself to something real, something solid before taking that leap of faith. Anna, the woman replied, her voice like a lifeline thrown into tumultuous waters. I promise I'll protect you. You can trust me. In that moment, something inside her cracked open, a flicker of hope igniting where fear had once reigned. She turned to the boy. He mirrored her glance, uncertainty and determination battling in his eyes. Together, they stepped off the ledge, descending cautiously amidst the shadows of the night. Each movement felt magnified the tension in the air, the brush of leaves underfoot, the mocking echoes of the men still searching. As they reached Anna, the woman enveloped them in a shroud of safety, leading them stealthily away from the chaos that churned behind. The cacophony of frustrated voices faded into the distance, their horizon widening with each step they took toward the unknown. Time sped forward as Anna guided them through the woodland paths, weaving past trees that towered like guardians shielding them from the past that threatened to swallow them whole. Her pace was fast, yet deliberate, and within her presence was a strength that felt almost maternal, warming away the cold edge of fear. Finally, they reached a small clearing lit by the silvery glow of the moon. A makeshift camp awaited them. There were familiar faces, others who had gathered to protect those caught in the web of her father's legacy. Their expressions were nestled in shadows but filled with energy, determination to help. We'll keep you safe, Anna assured them, kneeling at their level. You have to understand, your father's company is on the brink of being exposed. The stakes are high, and they will hunt you until they find you. The boy looked up at her, eyes wide with disbelief. What do you mean? What is happening? There's fraud, deception, and control over innocent lives, Anna explained, her gaze steady. But together, we can fight it. Help us uncover the truth. Your voice matters more than you know. She squeezed the boy's hand, and he squeezed back, an unspoken agreement that tied them tighter than they had ever been. There was something thrilling about the idea of standing for truth, about uncovering the darkness that had clung to their lives for far too long. Resolute, she found her voice rising. Above the uncertainty. If we're in this together, we can do it. We won't be silent anymore. Anna nodded appreciatively, her eyes glistening with respect. Then let us prepare for the journey ahead. There are risks, but it's time we expose the truth. Together, the trio began mapping out their plan, their hearts pounding in unison, the flickering hope weaving strong strands of connection between them. The weight of fear started to lift as possibilities unfurled before them. As the first light of dawn broke through the canopy overhead, glimmers of hope painted the world anew. They were no longer running from shadows. They were stepping towards the light, ready to reclaim their lives, and as they stood together in that clearing, they were united not just by circumstance but by a fierce resolve. The boy squeezed her hand one last time, a grin breaking through his fear, and she felt a swell of strength bloom within her. "We're going to be okay," she whispered, words threaded with determination. "Together, we are unstoppable." The shadows of their past were left behind as they stepped forward, ready to confront the truth and embrace a future woven from courage and hope. Now that you've reached the end of this thrilling conclusion, it's time to show your support for the stories that keep you on the edge of your seat. You need to subscribe now so you don't miss out on any upcoming exclusive tales. Smash that like button now to feed the algorithm. Your engagement makes a huge difference. Flood the comments section below with your thoughts, reactions, and theories about this wild ending. Let us know what you think, and don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. Your support is what keeps the stories coming, so let us keep this community growing together.